Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Nicholas Corcel and you're watching The Literary Nomad. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Soviet Stamps by Dmitry Samarov. And Soviet Stamps, or Dmitry Samarov for that matter, is a book and an author that you're unlikely to have heard of if you live outside of the Chicagoland area. And recently, about a week or two ago, I was just walking through a neighborhood called Bridgeport in the south side of Chicago, and I walked into this bookstore called Tangible Books right off Halstead Street, and I will put a link in the description below about how to locate the bookstore and their website. But what makes this bookstore so unique is that it focuses on two things: secondhand books that you have heard of, so your Hemingways, your Faulkners, those types of books. And then they have a section where they only specialize in local authors. And on the local author shelf, 100% of the money that you pay for the book goes to the author. So for example, this book right here was $20, and just as a quick aside, I really love how he did the pricing. It's just like etched into the actual book. So it was $20 US. And so I paid the guy a $20 bill, and all $20 goes to the writer. And the owner's logic behind that was that, he makes this money off of secondhand books. So Hemingway wrote a book, got published, somebody bought it. Somehow this owner came to have it, and then when he resells it, he makes all the profit. Hemingway doesn't get a cut, right? Because he already got his cut out of the beginning. And so his way of kind of making up maybe for that semi-parasitic relationship that he's developed with books is by giving back to current living authors. And I thought that was really awesome. So I wanted to definitely pick up something by a local author, and I decided on Soviet Stamps by Dmitry Samarov. And honestly, as this book was an independently published, very local, very kind of underground publication, I hadn't heard anything about it. I just picked it up because I thought that the title was interesting, and I thought the cover was beautiful. And so I'll quickly show you both the cover, the spine, and then the back, and then we'll get into it. So right here, you've kind of got that stamp feel, got the name, and then you have his name here, and then his publishing company is right here that he made. And then on the back, you've got like a sketch drawing of his old house in the Soviet Union. And so then it says, "How I Became an Artist." And that perfectly encapsulates what this book is about. It's a memoir told a little bit atypically, because Samarov, in addition to being a writer, was a cab driver, a bartender, and an artist. And art is really kind of the through line that we hear the story of his migration from Moscow in the former Soviet Union to Boston to New York, and then finally Chicago and Bridgeport, where he's made a home for himself. And so the book is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, this is the inside of it. But every story, or I guess even vignette is probably a better term for it than story. But in every one of these, we get a little drawing or something. So this one is from when he was a little kid, and we learn all about his life. We hear about what made him the person he is. The disconnect, right, between growing up as a kid in Moscow in the former Soviet Union to being transported to Boston. Being an immigrant, but being a white immigrant, and being a Jewish immigrant as well. So we hear about the layering and the texturing of immigrant identities. But we also hear about, kind of being that outcast, that artistic outcast. I think most of us here watching and reading these types of books and making material and discussing these books on the internet could probably relate to a degree of that feeling of being an outcast, where your interests lie on the periphery, right? Your interests lie on the periphery of what is normal or what is encouraged. Everybody's parents want them to become like a businessman or a mechanic or a doctor, lawyer, these types of careers. And painting, drawing, writing, these types of things are not very encouraged, especially when your immigrant roots are closer to the ground, to the forefront. Like you see the stereotypes of first generation parents being very difficult on their kids, hard on their kids, because they want them to, quote unquote, fulfill the American dream, and they want them to be more successful and have more opportunities than they have. And those stereotypes and those ideas are widely thought and widely accepted because, there's a certain degree of truth to them. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. I mean, we can't paint Soviet immigrants or Russian immigrants or Chinese immigrants or any immigrant monolithically, but you can extrapolate commonalities that kind of connect them, and this book does a great job of that. You know, we hear about him growing up and that painting is the only thing that he's really drawn to, but even his love of painting, of drawing, of creating art, he can't interact with it through that linear academic lens of like, we practice, then we incrementally improve. No, he has to do it his own way. He pushes back against all of his teachers, and that leads him to really struggle in some ways. He ends up dropping out of a school in New York and then floundering around at the Art Institute of Chicago, where eventually he does graduate, but he doesn't have the greatest academic experience, and that leads him to becoming a cab driver and working in bars and these types of things. But really, you could argue that that variety of experience, or his familiarity and his comfort within the quote-unquote underclasses, or you know, the people that operate beneath the veneer or beneath the elevation of the quote-unquote art world, is what makes his writing ring so true, and what makes his paintings resonate and his drawings resonate. Because that's one thing throughout this book that I noticed is his artwork, and I'm not the biggest art person, I'll admit that, but his artwork has a degree of groundedness. It has a degree of reality to it, and I wanted to really bring that out and show you at least one of the illustrations. I'll put a link in the description. All of his work he publishes for free on his website. If you are unsure if you want to buy it, or maybe you don't have the money, I would encourage you to check it out, even if you can't pay. But if you can pay, or especially if you live near Chicago, I would highly recommend popping into a local bookstore and buying the book, or emailing him. I'm sure that he'd be willing to ship it for an extra fee. But right here we have this beautiful portrait of his grandmother. It's right before the story called Baba Celia, I believe, right here. And it's just, I don't know, it's gorgeous. Just seeing the face of a woman who began in Moscow, was kind of the center of their like underground or black market social life, you know. We hear a lot about his grandmother and how she was really good at procuring things in the Soviet Union. She was able to, whatever you needed, she could find. She found him chewing gum, which was really placed at a premium, and was like a really great treat. She was able to find that, and it talks about how she decided to move to Israel, which makes sense to a degree. You know, they were a Russian Jewish family, and they were able to find refuge in Israel rather than the United States. But in that move, maybe her economic prospects improved, but she lost that, you know, that core essence, or at least a piece of that core essence. You know, humans, we all love to have usefulness. I think that's one thing that kind of unifies us all. We all love to feel useful. I think that's why we draw, or why we're drawn, and why we gravitate to things that we're good at. You know, a lot of people write because they're good at writing, or at some point they've received praise. In the same way, some people build scaffolding or make roofs or do plumbing. They do that type of work because they have a certain degree of aptitude to it, and they can derive usefulness for it. And I think that on the most basic of levels, I think we all have that desire to be useful. And so seeing the grandma improve the prospects of her family, but lose her usefulness, is in many ways the ultimate sacrifice. Another really interesting piece from the book, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about all the different stories that I found interesting, because I really would like you to buy it, especially because it's a local artist. I don't get anything from it, of course, but I think we should definitely make an effort to support artists that are currently alive, especially local, more lesser-known artists. But it's in his story or vignette called Reagan, and again, it's got a very powerful image right here. It's like juxtaposing Ronald Reagan with Soviet propaganda. But the first couple lines I think were really fascinating. I'm going to read it to you right now, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. So Samarov writes, "Growing up in Ronald Reagan's America as a Soviet immigrant was confusing. My parents and most of their friends looked on Reagan as a hero and credited him with bringing the USSR to its knees. Every American I knew considered him a villain who involved their country in covert military campaigns and sent untold numbers of the insane onto city streets by closing mental health facilities. It's common for immigrants from communist countries to swing hard to the right. After living all their lives in a controlled economy with little chance of mobility or self-determination, they are deeply suspicious of any kind of centralized government regulation. Many consider capitalism synonymous with freedom. When Reagan rallied against big government, he was singing their song. Those who lived under American capitalism all their lives often saw him differently. Coming from Hollywood, he knew the stagecraft needed to put the citizenry under his spell. Few people I knew were buying what he was selling. The wholesome return to an earlier, more innocent America that he advocated seemed exclusionary and sometimes just disingenuous, if not downright delusional. The repressed cookie-cutter society he championed was a repugnant nightmare to many. And I really found that interesting because of the truthfulness of his writing. I had grown up with fairly close ties to the immigrant backgrounds on both sides of my family, and the figure of Ronald Reagan was a very centralized figure of American good, for lack of better words. And my dad's family having come from the Soviet Union, very similar to the Samarovs, and my mother's family coming from France through Canada, all of which were fairly left-wing communist socialist countries, to a degree, at least to a greater degree than the United States, I think is fair to say. They all worshipped and put Ronald Reagan on this very elevated pedestal. And I think, without making any political commentary, I think it's interesting because he talked about how people from these more communist or controlled economies, such as the Soviet Union, and all of my friends growing up had ties to Eastern Europe and that kind of former Soviet bloc. But Ronald Reagan was an incredibly popular figure, so I was very surprised to see that he wasn't super popular. I mean, of course he was popular enough to win, but he wasn't like 90%, 100% of the country loving him, which is kind of what I always thought. As a kid, I didn't feel the need to research it or try to debunk the claims they were making. He was a president from the 80s, nothing to do with me. But it's interesting because after reading this, it made me kind of research it more and seeing that in those more, for lack of a better way of putting it, Americanized, so maybe the fourth or fifth generation immigrants rather than the first, and particularly the immigrants that came from countries that weren't communist or socialist leaning, that he wasn't as popular, that they saw through his facade, his Hollywood staginess, as Samarov likes to call it. It's lines like that that are what makes memoirs so important, and why as a genre I think that these books will really persevere. I mean, you see it a lot with like the Diary of Anne Frank, for example, where it's just somebody writing about their life, but as time progresses and time goes on, these artifacts become historical just as much as they do entertaining and insightful. So I read this right now, maybe 20 to 30 years after a lot of these events took place, and it's already educating me. It's already educating me, a person whose roots are not entirely similar, but not entirely dissimilar to Samarov's, and I'm still able to derive meaning from it, and that meaning will only grow and multiply exponentially as time continues to go on. Nevertheless, just speaking as a work of literature, as just a book, I thought this was a very good read, and I think it definitely compares to some of the other books I've reviewed on this channel, which I would say is very high praise, because a lot of the works we deal with on this channel are some of the best works of all time. But yeah, like I said earlier at the beginning of the year, I wanted to read more self and independent published stuff. I wanted to read more modern stuff. Until we've done that, we worked with Content by M.T. White, which I thought was outstanding. Bald and Bankrupt's book, which I think has a lot of value as a historical or anthropological artifact, but maybe the prose wasn't as good as this one or Content. And now we have Soviet Stamps by Dmitry Samarov, and I will definitely be picking up at least one, maybe two more of his books before I head out of Chicago in the next month or two, because I would imagine they'd be pretty difficult to get, especially abroad. But yes, I would strongly encourage you guys to all go out and pick up Soviet Stamps by Dmitry Samarov. And again, I will put links in the description to his website, as well as tangible books. If you're in the Chicagoland area or planning on coming to Chicago in the near future for whatever reason, Lala or whatever else is going on, definitely head down to Bridgeport. It's by the White Sox Stadium near 35th Street. It's the best bookstore in the city, in my opinion, and they have a great program to support local writers. Additionally, if you are a local writer in the Chicagoland area, you can work with them to arrange events, and they either charge you very low, or I don't think they charge anything at all. You just organize your own event. You can go there, do signings, things like that. It's a great space that's cultivating the culture, particularly the literary culture in Chicago, and I couldn't recommend it more. If you are not local, definitely just check out his website. There's PDFs available, and you can email him to arrange shipment or direct pickup. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.